welcome everyone to tonight's rescheduled Q&A with David Judson and Tim Carey discussing the documentary film Holy Frit. As people are joining, I will just introduce myself. My name is Dr Jasmine Allen and I'm director of the Stained Glass Museum, which has an amazing collection of stained glass in the UK, located in Ely Cathedral in the small city of Ely near Cambridgeshire. So as you're joining, I'll just give you a moment to all log in. If you want to tell us where you're joining from, please do pop your place in the chat and say hello. And we'll begin in just a moment. And thank you especially to those who joined a couple of weeks ago. We had to reschedule the event, but we're delighted to host this Q&A this evening. So we'll get started. I'll begin with an introduction before we introduce our guests. So Holy Frit, hopefully you have all seen it, is an amazing documentary that was released in 2021 and has won multiple awards, as you can see here. It was directed, written and produced by Justin Munro of Tandem Arts. The editor was Ryan Fritsch, the cinematographer Nick Mayer, and the producer Chris Sato. And in the words of director Justin Munro, who you can see there, this is not your grandma's stained glass movie. Anyone who's seen it, and I have seen it twice actually, knows that this is a really dramatic journey with some dynamic characters, some of whom we will meet in a moment. And it follows the story of a commission for what was then, this is Tim Carey and Justin Munro celebrating, I think, after winning some awards. The movie shows the commission of what was then, and I believe is still now, the largest stained glass window in the world, the Resurrection window at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas City. The window is the size of a basketball court, and it is the centerpiece of a brand new church which was built for this congregation in an elliptical 141,000 square foot building, which has seating for 3,500 members of the congregation. The window, as you will have known from the documentary, was completed in time for the church's opening in 2017, but it was quite a journey to get there. The actual window, which you will have seen in the movie, the Resurrection window, is a triptych designed to tell the biblical story, capturing the most important themes of the scripture, creation, sin, redemption, and restoration. And it features numerous scenes and people from the Bible, as well as historical figures such as John Wesley, Martin Luther, and Rosa Parks. It's an incredible film, which I think really demonstrates a story about humanity and creativity, inspiration and devotion. And it simultaneously speaks to the long-standing tradition of stained glass as a devotional art form, but also inspires us about the future of this art form through new techniques, as well as amazing architectural commissions like this. So I'm going to introduce our American guests. Please do turn your videos on, David and Tim. We're really glad you're joining us today. I know it's the morning time for you, so you're probably more fresh than we are here over in the UK. So Tim Carey trained in fine art at the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, and spent the first 5 years of his career as a figurative oil painter and muralist. He discovered stained glass by chance on a tour of the Judson Studios in Los Angeles in 2003, and then worked at Judson Studios for 14 years, where he transitioned to fused glass in 2016 upon completion of the Resurrection window. He's then set up on his own as Tim Carey Studio from 2018, shortly after the completion of this project. And David Judson of Judson Studios runs the oldest family-run stained glass company in America, based in Los Angeles. Not long after the release of Holy Frit, Judson Studios celebrated its 125th year anniversary. The Judson Studios was established in Los Angeles in 1897 by David Judson's great-great-grandfather, the painter and professor William Lees Judson. So Tim and David, please do say hello and tell us where you're joining from today.
Well, hello, good evening. I think we're
Good,
about a mile apart, Tim. I'm in Los Angeles. Tim's in South Pass.
Yep, right here,
And
just north of downtown LA.
Brilliant. And it's about 11 o'clock in the morning for you?
That's right. Yep,
Fantastic.
yep,
Hope you've had your coffee.
multiple.
almost enough.
And there is, I should say, a kind of third major character in the documentary who's not here today, but very well known in the glass art world, Narcissus Quagliata, who's a glass maestro and pioneer of the glass fusing technique. And I'm sure he's going to come up in our discussions later, but I thought I should mention him at this point. So before we delve into this project in the documentary, we've got some questions which people have submitted, and I've got some as well. I wanted to just catch up with what you've been doing since the documentary was released in 2021. It's now 2025, and I imagine things have changed rather for you both. So what have you both been up to since? Tim, you've set up on your own as an independent studio. How's that going?
Yeah, in 2018, I started my studio here in LA, and I've since moved the studio to my property in an adjacent apartment building. So I am just kind of I'm a 6-year-old startup still, and David's going to tell you he's still a 125-year-old startup. I don't think the attitude ever changes, but it's been really a kind of a wild roller coaster, because I was comfortable and I was happy and we were doing great things at Judson, and but with the sort of advent of fusing and the technology, I felt that I could sort of on my own spend more time pursuing the craft as a fine art and continue to do commissions, and I felt there was a great opportunity for me to sort of try to continue both experimental, educational, and commission-based work on my own, and it's been up and down, just like any new business. You're kind of always, at the end of every month wondering what's coming next, or you're always in between. Is there too much, or is there too little work, or what kind of work do I want to do? So I'm still doing some traditional stained glass. I'm doing fused glass projects that are combined with leaded glass, like this window, and actually just now starting a new window for the Church of the Resurrection, working with David at Judson on the sequel, we'll call it. Not the sequel to the movie, but the sequel to the window. So
Okay,
it's been
that's
fun.
exciting. That's exciting. And David, what have Judson Studios been up to? Clearly, there's a bit of a circular story there, but
Yeah, I think we've been just kind of continuing on with what we do. We, do quite a bit of traditional work still. We do quite a bit of restoration, and now we are kind of really pushing into the fusing realm as well. And that's really kind of where we've seen some kind of very drastic changes that continue to in the studio change how we work with stained glass. I mean, it's such a new thing that we are learning something new every time we take on a project, and it has something that either creatively or technically there's a constant kind of growth there, and bringing in technology now a lot more with working with a water jet now and doing a lot of different things that we had no idea we'd be doing 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
great. And we will paste the links to both Tim's website and also the Judson Studios website, so you can find out more about their projects, past and present, during this chat. So the film starts then, after an introduction to you both, with the story of a phone call from an architect about how big can you make a window, which was a question that we hear being asked. And we're introduced to the Resurrection Church, the designer, which I think was actually produced around 2014. So can you tell us from your perspective viewpoints about how Judson Studios got the commission? Because that's the kind of starting point of the movie, but presumably there's a bit that happens before.
Go for it, Dave.
Yeah, well, it was. Let's see. It was a bit kind of overwhelming. I think Tim and I had worked together for what, 10 years, and we had been kind of developing more of our traditional elements, but wanting to do new things too. So with the phone call was very exciting, and we knew this was the opportunity. It was clearly not a call you get very often, and an opportunity that we knew would be life-changing. And so, when we kind of started thinking about this, it took us a little while to figure out because it was very confusing to understand kind of where the selection and the church committee was coming from because we were getting kind of mixed signals about a traditional approach, but a very contemporary one. And the architecture obviously was very contemporary. And so we were trying to figure out how kind of fit into that. And, I think what we came to conclude was that Judson being known as a traditional studio would be much easier for us to come up with a contemporary design from a traditional starting point as opposed to a very contemporary artist kind of coming in and trying to do, add some fundamentals of, traditional fundamentals to the project. And so I think we felt that we were very well positioned. And I think, we worked very hard on the presentation. I think Tim was kind of, yeah, I mean, it was just we had a very short amount of time to come up with something, and Tim was basically we kind of locked him in a room, and he was like trying to come up with something that had never really been done before. I think that was what was so difficult is that a window of this scale was more like a mural than it was a stained glass, so we didn't really have a lot of precedent to work with, and I think that was where the struggle initially was, and but we really had pushed him to work digitally, and he had really kind of resisted it at first, and then he really kind of blossomed with it. And I think he really kind of got really skilled in working digitally on the design side, which for us was, we were a bunch of Luddites here, kind of working in a traditional world, and Tim just kind of started in on the digital side. And I think that was really crucial to the ultimate decision because we actually took our digital setup to the presentation when we presented to the committee, and Tim basically showed them how quickly and easily we could adapt the design. And so that I think with the pastor and the kind of the presence of the pastor, and we knew that he really wanted to have input on the project, allowed us to show how kind of flexible we could be with the design, and it evolved through the whole thing. And so we were finalists with I think an Italian firm and a German studio that was working with an American artist. And so, I think we kind of presented very well, and they gave us the project, but not 100%. I mean, we were kind of on it was like, well, let's wait and see what you guys can do here. And so we were still kind of on pins and needles through the initial process, but it was pretty exciting to know that we had a shot at it.
Yeah, and I would, if I could add something to that, we had it's just something crazy about timing of things and the way things work. And my journey from starting at Judson to this window and the project, one of the things coming from the fine art side of things that attracted me to working at the studio initially was the fact that I was coming into a situation that was not only new for me, but it was kind of new for David. He was taking over the generation before him's role as in leadership in the studio. And so what attracted me to Judson was David's kind of constant desire, which matched mine, which was like, we both have this great opportunity to do something really good with stained glass. He has a chance to add his mark to the legacy of Judson. I have a chance coming from the fine art side to do great things. And I see, like, we both saw these opportunities every time something would come past us, whether it's a simple church window or a big project or even, just a spec thing that we were doing. We were kind of in lockstep, always trying to sort of figure out how can we make this better? How can we kind of get beyond the sort of crusty attitude of some of the old stained glass studios? And so over the course of 10 years, I think we built this really great sort of symbiotic relationship that helped us. We had a couple other big projects before this that we thought were like the pinnacle. and technology got involved, and David was always buying me new gadgets, and I was always, like he said, resisting, and we just got to this point, and then this project falls in our lap, and it's just like, wow, couldn't have been more perfect timing, because it just came at a time where we felt we were really ready for it, and we felt that we had separated ourselves a little bit because of what we had done, not only with technology, but we brought in Justin, actually the filmmaker. We brought him in with no idea or dreams of doing a film. We didn't even have the project. We just wanted him to tell our story and make a sales video about our company. And he came in and did this amazing video that talked about David and me and some of the projects. And I think it really helped to kind of humanize us to the church. It set us apart in terms of our presentation and our willingness to work with them and to be collaborators. And so I think we really got lucky, and it was sort of the pinnacle of 10 years of working together and kind of knowing, kind of being a sort of very good, what's the word, we worked together well. I think that was the key to showing that to the church and separating ourselves.
Yeah. A kind of a partnership that complements one another. And I think
complementary, that's the word.
Yeah, the vision and appetite and energy comes across, of course, in Justin's documentary. And you answered my question there about how did he get involved? You guys brought him on. That was part of your pitch, was it, to make a documentary alongside the making of the window?
Yeah, it was really just to kind of do a 5-minute sales video, just to sort of show the church who we are and what we do. And then the rest of it was Justin just being a pest, right? He showed up and he was like, whoa, what is this place? Wow, who's this Judson? Like, what, really, stained glass here in LA? And then I think the big one was when he's like, and wait, there's a guy, what's his name? Narcissus, that you guys might, so he got sucked in, just totally sucked in, just based upon what he was seeing and experiencing. So he just asked David, I think, can I keep filming? And we're like, oh, sure, keep filming.
The whole thing was a creative whirlwind, it seems.
It was, yeah.
How many cameras did he bring? Because there's, it seems that he's captured all of the kind of key moments. I wondered, like, about that kind of side of things. Like, what was it like also to have rolling cameras?
There were days where he would bring in, like Luke, our cinematographer, would come in with big cameras and rigs and things. Certain special days where he brought in special cameras, but a lot of days it was just him with his Canon digital camera and his iPhone, and he was bouncing back and forth from one to the next. Sometimes he would hand the iPhone over to Kyle, who works at the studio, and it was truly like guerrilla filmmaking, where he was just utilizing any and everything that he could get his hands on, because and I think what the magic of the movie, in my opinion, is the fact that he was there in real time, sort of following us around and capturing all of these moments that go beyond just the making of the window. So,
and was that ever intrusive, or did you find that it like galvanized the project or kept you focused in some ways?
Always.
Yeah.
No, he was pretty sensitive about it, but it was he has thousands and thousands of hours. I mean, he was filming everything to capture something, and because making stained glass is not the most exciting thing all the time, right? So I think he I don't know, who knows what the ratio of hours that he used to what he has in what he captured. But I mean, he was pretty good about making sure that we knew his schedule, when he was setting up and where he could set up, and he got to know the space pretty well, that he was not always in our way.
Amazing opportunity, and he did capture it all and condensed it into, like you say, an absolutely riveting film, which when you say to people a documentary about a stained glass window, they really don't understand quite what you're trying to tell them to watch. Okay, so moving on to the kind of making of the window. It's a vast artwork, this resurrection window, with this overarching theme, but it features so many different scenes and people from the Bible, as well as figures from across history, Billy Graham, Mother Teresa, loads of others. I just wondered how much the brief from the church kind of set those depictions, and how much was kind of your vision, Tim.
Yeah, man, the design process was a wild one, because it sort of evolved over time. It started out with one concept and evolved into another. There's a part in the movie where I think Justin flips through all the different versions that we did. And this was like, what David said earlier, like we basically just put me in a room and locked the door, and I was going back and forth with Adam, and David would come in, and we'd decide internally what we thought was good, and then we'd submit it, and then Adam would come back, and then I would get these random phone calls from Adam in his car driving, and he would say, "Hey, Tim, I got an idea. Why don't we do this?" And I'd say, oh, okay. Or why don't we add this person? Or why, let's do this. Let's put these people here. How can we fit this in? So he was constantly pushing the design to have more, 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 more.
And this is
And
the minister. Adam is the
Adam
minister.
Hamilton, yeah, he's the pastor, senior pastor of the church, and so it was his vision to have essentially, and this never changed. The vision was the three gardens of the Bible. So it was the Garden of Eden, it was the Garden of New Life, which is in Revelation, the Tree of Life, and then in the center, what he was calling the Garden of Resurrection. Jesus was initially thought to look like a gardener when he came out of the tomb. That was said once. There was the tomb in the garden, and so he can, and then there's the tree, which he considers, or the cross is oftentimes called a tree. So that was the theme, and then the question was, what do we do in between, and how do we like link everything together? And then at some point, I came up with this idea of doing a river, because water is such a common theme in the Bible, and like David said, like the size of this window, the location. You guys in England, you don't. I mean, it's usually stained glass is sort of on the sides and it sort of wraps around you and it sort of creates this feeling. This is like a movie screen that it's really, there's nowhere to hide and you have to find some way to make it all work. And so I think the river helped because it sort of created a compositional element. And then once I did that, that's when Adam was like, okay, well, why don't we just tell the whole story of the Bible along that river? And I'm like, oh man, okay. So it just evolved in that way over months, many months. And then, the figures towards the end, we hemmed and hawed over the sizes of things and some color decisions and added all those figures up in the sky as well, which were the cloud of witnesses, which are very specific characters from the Old Testament and the New Testament. So it was a journey, just that part of it. I mean, forgetting about the fabrication, the design was, I don't remember, David, what was it like? At least 6 months we worked on that, right?
Yeah, and it just kept evolving, and then at some point we had to cut Adam off of no more figures. He kept
Right.
on adding figures, and he'd get an idea like Tim was saying, and call up Tim and say, oh, let's and so he'd stick another figure in, and we at some point just had to draw the line. So that's it.
And have you both got a favorite scene or vignette or figure that's included?
Oh, good question. Um, I would say that what's interesting is as the artist, technically, I knew that there was going to be a learning curve for me. So we started very strategically in an area of the window that was more expressive and more kind of painterly. And then by the time we finished, we were on the right side of the window with all those realistic figures. So by the time we got there, I was getting very comfortable, like with all these little moves and making these portraits and things. So I think to me, something early on is probably my favorite, like the scene of Mary and Jesus, which is very loose at the tomb, or Mary Magdalene. I love the two Marys at the bottom of the window. I like the decision that we made to put them there as this sort of anchoring elements. And I just like the expressive nature of a lot of that stuff in the middle versus, yeah, that's the image there, the two Marys. And then, versus all the figures that go around them, a little more illustrative. They're a little more like, descriptive of specific people. But the Marys, I feel like, are archetypal, feminine figures that I'm and expressive, really kind of, they're not as realistic as some of the other ones. So that's probably my favorite.
David?
I'd say the face of Christ, I think, is the most important panel in the window, and probably the most, to me, probably the best panel I've ever seen of any stained glass. I mean, I think the head, when you see the head and everything that went into the head, and how important the head was to Adam and the entire congregation. If we didn't get the head right, then basically the whole window doesn't work. And that was so important that and it was absolutely the hardest panel, that most difficult panel to make. I think Tim and Narcissus were. It was a very kind of stressful time anyway during the project, and it was you know uh, something that had to really be thought out, because they didn't want they told us everything they didn't want about the Christ, but they didn't know what to tell us what they really wanted. And so that was a really kind of a very kind of long, drawn out, difficult piece to really kind of come together. And I think it's just the way that the Tim and Narcissus made it, it was brilliant, and to me, I think is still one of the most important pieces I've ever seen.
Great. And you've mentioned the church community, the pastor, and I guess they had a committee that were kind of involved in this window. But there were also, I think, more than 2,900 people who actually donated to the window in memory of a loved one. Is that kind of acknowledged? Did those people have some kind of say? Like, because there seem to have been a lot of people involved. And so, can you tell us a bit more about that committee and
Yeah,
how that was managed? Because it must have been quite a nightmare. I think you guys have alluded already to
yeah.
the fact you
The
had to kind of cut off at some point.
committees are wild in stained glass, as you guys probably know too. It's you have a lot of different opinions. This was actually, I think David would agree, one of the better committees we've worked with because they had a lot of good questions. They had a lot of good, opinions about things. It's the diverse community. The Church of the Resurrection. I think one of the reasons they're so successful is because they don't lean like conservative or liberal. They're very diverse and they have a lot of countering opinions. So thankfully, again, like I was saying earlier, David and I had gotten used to this in our 10 years working together, how to sort of deal with these types of committees and how to make them feel heard and seen, while at the same time sort of telling them what we think as experts is best and not best. But I think we probably did more for these folks in terms of tried things like I mean, some of the designs were wild. Like there was a design that, because they couldn't figure out like, what do we want Christ to look like? Because he's obviously, we don't want him to be a blonde, like, Northern European looking, but we don't want to like super specifically try to figure out exactly what he would have looked like. And there was a point where they were like, oh, we don't even want to see him. Let's just make him a glowing light in the center. And that wasn't working at all. There was no anchor to the piece. And then finally, what it came around to was, let's just make him just very expressionistic. Let's just put greens and purples and pinks. And, that way people won't look at him and say, oh, he's blonde or oh, he's this. He's just full of color. And so that was that we came to that as a group. A lot of really good decisions came through those committee meetings. And I think it was like, we just sort of survived it, just like you always do, and tried to make everybody happy. And for the most part, by the time the window was approved, 100 people, they were not involved. They signed the floor. I think they probably got a memento here and there, a little donor gift. They did get like little ornaments that we made, but oh gosh, that would have been a nightmare if we had to listen to everybody about that.
That's a relief. It's also an astonishing number of people. I mean, I guess it really just demonstrates the size of the window. It's a huge number of donors. Yeah. So moving on to the fabrication of the window, Tim, working with Narcissus, there's a great quote in the documentary that you say, he is to stained glass what Spielberg is to filmmaking. He's a big character, as are you. I think that comes across in the documentary. And there's a kind of, it feels like there's a sense of relief for you when he kind of comes on board, when you think about how are we going to actually make this window. But then immediately that's followed by oh no, who is this guy? He's all over my territory, as he begins to tweak the design, get more and more involved, and he's quite critical at times. So what was this like? At what point did you realize this was going to work? At what point did that kind of, oh, what's happening here, become a positive thing that saw the project? Because I think your personalities naturally came together ultimately, and then this amazing creative partnership kind of continues.
Yeah, in the beginning, we had it's funny because we had I think just recently before this window started, somebody in our studio, maybe it was David, had bought Narcissus' book, which had just come out, which had his whole kind of story and all of his work in it, just mind blowing. And the thought when you look through a book like that, when you're somebody like me who's doing stained glass, seeing somebody like him who's pushed the boundaries so far, was just like somebody like that is untouchable. You're not going to ever find him or talk to him, much less get a chance to work with him. And so that in the beginning was really the hardest, like not the hardest, but the most like the clearest feeling I had about him was that, wow, this is amazing. But who knows where he is or how I would ever get a hold of him. And then just so happened that he was teaching a workshop in Denver, which again was one of those serendipitous things where David and I said, okay, let's go explore this. Another thing that, David and I had been talking about fusing, bullseye, like we'd sort of dabbled with like kind of always had our eye on it. But this gave us that opportunity to say, well, this is a link. Because fusing to me always felt like one thing, like a more object-based or casting or kind of diffuse, sandy sort of art, Pat de Verre, but it never felt to me like image work until I saw Narcissus work and he was teaching it, and I jumped on a plane and and when we met, we really hit it off. Like we were very similar in terms of our journeys and our backgrounds, in our aesthetic kind of interests. And then yeah, we thought like, okay, we got to have him. We can't do this without him. David sort of made it happen on the business side of things, and on the relationship in terms of Judson and bringing him in and how it would work. And then really it just unfolded exactly how you see in the movie. It's like he comes in strong, you get scared, and then just when you think he's gone off the rails, he says something that totally softens you up and to sort of like remind you that he's there to teach and that he's there to help me grow. He never tried to become the lead of the project. I mean, he really was invested in it being successful more than he was invested in it being his thing, which was a surprise. So he was just, I think, this constant paradox all the time, where he just would in one moment appear like, oh gosh, he's going off the rails, and then in another moment totally shock you by something very generous or something really educational. I can't say enough about it. I've done a lot of these, and it's wild how much he helped me, and how I think David would say the same thing about the studio, in his own way, a very unique way of approaching people and approaching things. And without him, this thing would have never worked.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of things. We talk a lot about this. We've always talked about it, just the perfect storm of everything kind of coming together for this project. And Narcissus was a piece of that, in the sense that I don't think that we hadn't really thought of Narcissus. It was like Tim said, I think we were flipping through a book or a magazine. He said, oh, like, what about talking to Narcissus? He's giving us a course. I said, yeah, absolutely. You got to go. And he went, and yeah, they hit it off, and I started getting on the phone and checking with everyone, because Narcissus was always the maverick in the stained glass community. Right. And so, and everyone had kind of a story. Oh, be careful, though. Don't get mixed up with Narcissus and this and that. And it was funny, because everyone that had kind of something negative to say about Narcissus never really knew Narcissus. It was always like a secondhand story, and that's what kind of tipped me off of like, that something wasn't off, something was not right. And I think our gut, both with him hitting off with Tim right away, and us kind of realizing that everything kind of made sense. And for me, from a studio standpoint, I'd always been looking to Germany in terms of contemporary work, right? Post-war, the Germans really are the ones that kind of lead the stained glass world. And we had seen so many American artists going to Germany to get their glass projects carried out. I just felt like we're in Los Angeles. We should be on the cutting edge of stained glass. Why, and so it just clicked that this was the answer. Because there was no way to compete against what the Germans do. They've been doing it for 50, 60 years. They're very, very good at it. There's a number of them that do it. But no one had really done fusing. And so that was the big question. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, this is either a really good idea or a really bad idea. And I guess we're about to find out. And Narcissus was the only one who could really kind of get us to where we needed to be. Because he had done large scale projects, and he was at a point in his career, I think, where he had this vast knowledge of working fused glass and stained glass, and kind of was at an age where he was ready to mentor and to share. And that's really, I think, where that relationship happened with Tim, and he could really kind of walked him through something that neither of us knew where it was going. And so it really, like Tim said, we were nervous that Narcissus would want to take over or really kind of become the lead. And that was always that was something that Tim and I talked about quite a bit, and that we we're on the same page of like that can't happen, that he needs to be a supporting role. And but we needed his leadership, we needed his experience, we needed his wisdom, and it just worked beautifully, and it was great to see the two of them working at times, and 80% of the time they got along and they did well.
It's a good number.
80, 70%, Tim, I don't know.
80. The other thing that we both forgot to mention was also Narcissus came with a relationship with Bullseye Glass, which is
Yeah.
really important because Bullseye is the technological kind of backbone of fusing, inventors of the techniques and the glass, and so being that they're on the West Coast and we're on the West Coast, having Narcissus as an access point because of his history there really helped us get in the door with them. I mean, not that they would have not helped us out otherwise, but for him to have had that experience in those relationships really facilitated us being able to learn from Ted Sawyer at Bullseye and from Dan, and to kind of allow them to sort of enter the scene as partners in this project too. So that was another big one that we did. I don't even think we saw that coming, but very early on, Narcissus kind of said we need to be connected with Bullseye. We need to involve them, and they actually helped develop some of these techniques on the fly while we were there. Ted was saying, "Oh, you need to do this. This is how you're going to produce this," and so they were a big part of helping us make it happen too.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's
absolutely.
talk about fuse loss, and because America, I think it's quite clear, are leading in the fuse glass art process. Bullseye are an enormous maker, and they supply glass for fusing all over the world. Um, of course, fused glass is actually an ancient technique, but in Egypt and Rome, it was used to create beads and bowls and jewelry. When the blowpipe was invented, what we might call traditional stained glass kind of took over with the flat sheet glass and lead. But recently, in modern times, we've kind of returned to this idea of fusing using frit, this powdered, ground up bits of colored glass. And it's amazing watching you, Tim, with Narcissus creating these amazing kind of what end up looking like painterly images, but just from this powdered colored glass. And Narcissus makes you wait in the documentary. It feels like for a long time before you begin experimenting, making pieces for this window. And there's this amazing moment, the kiln reveal, the rainbow Noah, which feels like a real moment where you're getting on the right track with this process. So what was it like to first have a go, and how was that kind of journey for you?
Yeah, I was chomping at the bit from the get-go. And he felt his responsibility was to make sure I was ready before I got involved in it. And as a young artist and somebody who thinks he knows it all, like I was, I didn't like that. I was pushing and pushing and pushing, and his whole thing was, no, the window has to be good, and if I have to do a lot of it myself, that's what I'm going to do. That was really the big tension of the early part of the window that Justin captured on film, and those were some of those moments where you're like, okay, we're done working, Justin. You can turn the camera off. And he just kept filming, and then he follows us over to the kiln and we start having this conversation. We didn't even know he was there. And this is when I'm like, Narcissus, I could do it. If it doesn't look great, so what? And he's like, no, no, no. If it doesn't look great, it's your responsibility. And those people of that community are going to have to live with it. And if it sucks, it's your fault. Like basically he forced me to go, you have to really make sure you know what you're doing before you touch this window. So it was hard. And then at some point he just kind of disappeared, which you see in the movie. He would go to Mexico, and it was almost like he did that on purpose. He had all these little tricks, and he would disappear, and then I would be forced to try some stuff, and then I ended up sort of jumping in just at the right time. And again, it's sort of like the magic of Narcissus and as a teacher and as a mentor, kind of knowing when to push me, when to back off. So yeah, it's wild to kind of see it back when I watch the movie that we captured all that on film.
And can you explain why the window couldn't be made solely using traditional techniques, or could it, and it was a deliberate choice not to?
Go for it, Dave.
Well, we initially that was the plan, right? And we were gonna use flash glass and try all these different things, and we just everything we were testing uh it just kind of fell flat, and we realized we were not getting kind of the results we wanted in terms of, carrying out Tim's design, in that we wanted it to be very painterly, and we wanted it to be very fluid, and you I think we were initially, obviously very apprehensive in the fact, because we'd never even fire infused glass. I mean, we didn't even have electric kilns when we started this, and so we were basically like going from 0 to 100 in a very short amount of time, and with no kind of like practice, right? This was it. I mean, we were already thrown into the game. We had to carry it out. We were on a timeline, and fusing, just looking at Narcissus's work and looking, at the design that Tim had done, we knew that this had to be something that this was the opportunity to do it. And so for me, from a studio point of view, it was a leap, in the sense of like, oftentimes fusing is associated with, hobbyists, or, some kind of a lower level. Like it's, Narcissus really is the only one stained glass artist that has really taken it to a high level of stained glass. And we realized that working with fusing can be either extremely sophisticated or kind of hokey. It's like a fine line between the two. And we realized that this was the perfect opportunity to do, 161 windows in essence of fused glass. And it's like, this is the perfect opportunity to actually commit and kind of work with the material. And what we loved about it is that it wasn't just painting enamels, it was working with the material of glass. And so that, I think, to me, really resonated in the sense of kind of, like you said, there's ancient, connections that I think really was inspirational to kind of carry out everything with the fusing. And the leading was discussed about, well, why is there lead in here? And part of that was because of that traditional side of the committee that wanted it to feel a little bit traditional. And so and it also, in terms of production, gave us a little flexibility to not commit to having to make 4x5 pieces and have something go wrong. We had smaller pieces. There was a lot of pieces initially, especially initially, that were rejected that had to be remade. And so luckily we weren't making 4x5 pieces over again. So yeah, it was just a kind of a perfect medium, in the sense that it allows the ability to create your own glass, in essence, right? And be almost like impressionistic, and an interpretation of a painting, as opposed to, being limited to, all the constraints that we see in traditional stained glass.
And has that taken off? Have you had specific requests or commissions since either of you, in your respective workplaces, for like similar techniques, the lead and the fused glass together?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of piggybacking on what David says, like from the artistic point of view, for me, and this might resonate with some of the traditional stained glass folks, or you probably know this because you guys have archives. Well, I used to spend a lot of time in the Judson archives, and in those folders and those little rooms with all these old color sketches, I would pour through these amazing watercolor drawings. Frederick Wilson, famous Frederick Wilson, his original paintings and drawings are at Judson, and I would see 100 years worth of these amazing paintings, and then sometimes I would see the window afterwards, and I'd go, okay, I kind of like the sketch more than I like the window. So from a painting point of view, because the sketch would have purple shadows and pink highlights and reflected light and a core shadow that was like, and then the window would be like one piece of glass and then black or brown paint. Not that the windows aren't beautiful in and of themselves, but the magic of the sketch, the color sketch, was the thing. And that was the moment in this project that really was the aha moment for me. Was like, okay, those things that are in the window, like at the bottom, the garden, where I go like with my brush and it makes a little like 3 lines, like a sketch, that would never show up in a stained glass window. That would become a sort of a grisaille or a painted piece of green glass with black lines. But in this, not only were we like, we can do that, but it almost was like, we have to do this because that's what's going to make it contemporary. It's going to be like a giant color sketch in the sky, and all of those purple shadows and those random sort of expressionistic colors can be included. They don't have to be sort of toned down using paint. So that was a big moment for me. And yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it hasn't, I would say, I don't know how David feels, but it hasn't been as popular. I kind of thought, like, when I left Judson and I started my own studio, I was like, oh, projects like this are just going to keep pouring in. Everyone's going to see this window and they're going to want me to do all this work. And it hasn't really been like that. I don't know why. I think there's something about doing something so big that oftentimes somebody might have a small project and go, oh, they don't want to do that. Like they only do these big giant things. But
So we're telling everyone you're open to small projects as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, and like these techniques can be anything. They don't, I mean, if you zoom in on any part of this window, it's an art piece in and of itself. So yeah, I mean, what do you think, Dave? Do you feel like your expectation in terms of leaded fused pictorial type of projects like this has been met, or I don't know?
Yeah, I don't think it's as kind of I think we're still early, I would say, and there's still quite a bit of an educational and kind of explanation of what fused glass is. People don't know what it is. They don't understand it. And when we committed to doing this project and building out a new studio, for me, once I took care of Tim and Narcissus, and they were kind of, had to make the thing, for me, it was like, well, what's next? And so we couldn't commit to building out a new studio and then not know what's going to come. And so for me, a lot of that was opening it up and building a space that artists could come and work in, and painters primarily. And they often come with preconceived notions of what stained glass is, and so they want to work in that traditional method. And which is really kind of, I don't know, it seems ironic, but then as they get exposed to the fusing studio and what we can do with fused glass and the effects that it has, they get drawn in. And it's really interesting to see this kind of evolution. Some of the artists do it pretty quickly, some of them it's a little slower, but they see the kind of the ability, the capabilities in fused glass that opens up, so many possibilities for them, especially as a painter who can see their work being translated into stained glass. And that's really where we have a handful of artists that come back on a regular basis because it's, glass is one of those things that once you're bitten, right, that's it. You can't really ever move into a different realm. And so I think fused glass is a very early in its very early stages. As you mentioned, blown hot glass and blowing and Chihuly kind of you know basically ruled in the 70s and the 80s, and fusing doesn't really kind of start taking become a reality until the mid 80s, and 90s. And Judson's kind of the first major studio to really commit to working in it. And so and I would say it wasn't easy, and it's still not easy. It's a culturally, process wise, business wise, it's a very different animal than traditional stained glass. Um, and so I think there's, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's something that is very powerful, but also can be extremely difficult as well. And so it's very exciting when things start happening where we see a lot of. We've been working on a large project for 5 years now that will be coming out later this year. That's almost entirely cut on a water jet. So the entire project's built into the computer and is being output through a water jet. So every piece, we're pre-making all of the pieces and then cutting with a water jet. So the technology that's gotten involved with this also is kind of intriguing to see where that could potentially go.
And in your answer there, David, you mentioned, without mentioning it specifically, but you actually built this. Judson Studios built a purpose-built studio in South Pasadena for glass fusing, and we see Tim working in that studio, and it seemed like the project kind of kick-started that whole idea, and it's great to hear that it's being used now, and that by lots of different artists who are kind of coming into contact with this technique. Speaking of the kind of new technical process that relatively new that is fused glass and the involvement of Bullseye in their development and their scientific department. Jessica asks about if there's any understanding of future conservation, treatment, or repairs, and does Bullseye like produce any guidance for the kind of materials science? This is a very specific question, but I guess it's one that conservators will be thinking.
Yeah, Tim and I talked about this a lot when we were doing this. It was a question that came up a lot. And yeah, I think I know how Tim would answer this. Yeah, as an artist, he's like, that's not my problem.
I was the old Tim, David. That was the old Tim.
Okay. But yeah, that's a very good question. I don't know that it's fully answered yet. It hasn't been around long enough. I think there's always a solution as long as Bullseye's in existence, right? And I mean, they're not the only studio that makes compatible glasses, but this is completely a Bullseye palette, and we've committed to working with Bullseye glass. They're very good about helping us with very technical things. I think, what I feel about this is at some point, as the knowledge of fusing kind of expands and becomes, it's something that Tim and Narcissus committed to after this project was educating people in fused glass. And, I think as that knowledge kind of continues to grow, you'll be able to kind of go back and look at how these windows were made and potentially, restore them, preserve them. I think the same problems that we have with traditional leaded stained glass are the same problems we'll have with, the principles are the same in conservation, right? And, so you have the ability to treat the glass the same way. Replacing the glass, if there is a question of replacing the glass, then those same principles come into play as well. And so, but I think there will be a larger body of knowledge of being able to understand how something was made if it needed to be recreated at some point. I don't know that is super viable today, but I think it will be in the future.
Yeah, I guess it would also depend on those artistic skills of being able to create such works with Frit as well, if replacement pieces were needed.
Exactly, and that's what I mean is that ability to understand how Frit is created, and I don't know that it'll ever be a perfect match, but it rarely is in traditional stained glass either.
Well, I think that we're coming up against a really kind of philosophical issue when it comes to fused glass and stained glass merging. If you look at fused glass over the first 50 years of its existence, there are lots of projects. There's Klaus Moye. You've got these originally beautiful fused glass, cast glass pieces, and those most of the art done in fused glass is considered fine art. And so I don't think it was ever done with this idea that, well, I'm going to document everything I do, so in case my bowl breaks, whoever needs to fix it can fix it. Now, we have this expectation in stained glass because of its history as a decorative art that things need to be replaceable. We need to be able to fix it. We need to be able to go back in. We need documentation. So I think what's merging is, and I think it is important to talk about it. And I did say at a conference once, it's not my responsibility. And I think that was in response to the sometimes attitude of conservators that we need to do their job for them, kind of like, and I agree that we need to document what we're doing because that is going to come up down the line. But I don't know that Tiffany ever documented everything he did. I think the conservators need to come and learn. I mean, I think it's important that they come and spend time talking to us, the artists, and understanding it. So versus expecting us to sort of say, okay, we're going to lay this all out for you. We're going to plan on this breaking. Obviously, re-leading a window is different than repainting. Repainting one of these faces in this window is something that somebody will have to take on who's an artist. Like somebody takes on replacing a Tiffany head, and it's like it's a discovery process. It's an educational process, and it's just a question of how we work together. I think that's really what it comes down to. And I'm happy to document things when there's no lead involved and it's just one big panel of glass. Oftentimes, David, I'm sure you run into this too with public art. That's the big fear. We do a big panel, we're going to put it in our bus stop. What if it breaks and the artist isn't around anymore? And so the goal is, number one, to make sure it doesn't break. And then number two, just like any art piece, just to say, like, look, what if all day long. Paintings fall apart. Every type of art is subject to decay, and we do our part, but I think there's a degree to which there's an expectation, and because of the stained glass thing, that we need to do more. And so I have grown to the point where I do document, and I'm willing to sort of submit techniques, and but at the same time, I think it's a partnership. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Okay. Um, so going back to the kind of the making and the experience of the window, David, Judson, what about Judson team in all of this? Because it seems in the documentary that they're a real family. There's two memorable individuals that I remember. A young man, Quentin, who really live, it seems, in the project, and I think ends up coordinating the second studio. And then there's another more experienced glazier, I think his name is Robert, who is a bit skeptical at the beginning and then is kind of converted to this whole project. So I wondered if you could tell me a bit more about the rest of the Judson team, who are clearly in the background with the whole of this project, some of them directly involved in the kind of execution when it comes to the leading, how that was as a manager of the studio and how it was for those individuals.
Yeah, well, I think everyone was open and interested in what was happening. Again, it being a second facility, it was a little kind of a little degree apart from a lot of folks. But as the project progressed, yeah, the team had to grow because of the assembly and everything coming together, right? So you had to figure out how to glaze this thick glass, right? And how to install it. And, all those practical things started, coming into play, with infrastructure and saddle bars and all of these things that, you're concerned about. And as a studio, we all kind of pitch in as. So, and Tim at that time was our artistic director and kind of, driving everybody to really think about this, because I think there was some hesitation and there was, a lot of like, that's not my problem, pushing it back on Tim. And so, so, it was creating a little bit of a kind of a divergence of the studios because they were doing two very different things and on clearly on two different paths, and that's still true today to a certain extent. Um, but we have just amazing, talented people here that really were interested and stepped up, and that have been here for a long time. And Quentin now is running the studio and doing things on the computer that I absolutely have no idea how he does and how he did. And I said, Quentin, yeah, I thought you didn't like computers, and he said, well, I didn't know they could do this, and so uh, where it's going, I think, is really intriguing. And we've always had such a talented group of people here that all contribute through the process and kind of see things through and are proactive about contributing to what the project is as a team, because it does take a team. And so Robert's no longer with us. He's retired, but always still a cynic.
And David, as studio director and manager, there's clearly moments in the film where you see that the project budget is escalating, time is running away, you're having to deal with creative people like Tim and Narcissus, manage the happiness of the rest of your team. There's clearly ups and downs. And how did you manage that as an individual and keep the studio going and happy?
Yeah, it was just checking in with everybody, and there was a lot of pressure. This obviously was taking the energy from everything, from everywhere, and from everyone. And there was a lot of personalities, a lot of people kind of trying to understand what was happening, and everyone was open to it, but I think there was constant pressure in regards to keeping everything not only on time, but somewhat on budget. And so we knew this was an investment. It was an investment, in setting up a new kind of facility, a new technique, how do we keep this as a kind of going interest in the sense of like this project's going to be done, right? And so that was a lot of, like I said, when I had to make sure Tim and Narcissus had everything they needed. I couldn't always support them. At one point, they had to basically carry the load. I mean, it was just the way the project ended up going. It really was focused on Tim and Narcissus, and especially Tim. Like Tim said, Narcissus would just disappear at times. And uh, but that being said, you couldn't do much more, right, than what it was. And so for me, thinking about the horizon consistently, because it is a ship, and you've got people on board that have to, everyone has to be rowing in the same direction, and you have to think of that next thing that's coming down after this, because this is going to go away. And so um, it was very stressful in the sense of you're coming from a traditional family business that's multi-generational. You never want to be the last generation. So the risk kind of weighs on you in a lot of different ways, that it's not just me, right? It's, a generation of people and everyone who works here. And how do you kind of continue on? And also, create something that was going to be notable and different and unique, and that was played into a lot of that. So there was a lot of soul searching and trying to work on vision and that kind of stuff. And but luckily we have a great team here of talented people that really I knew would be along for the ride.
Well, it was clearly potentially risky, and enormously courageous and ambitious, but you all pulled through the side. I think everyone's watched the movies, they know that it all works out in the end. The congregation, seeing the window for the first time is a super powerful moment that we see in the documentary, and I think you can see the impact on you two as well, and the rest of the studio who are experiencing that. So there's quite a few powerful moments in this creative journey against that stressful backdrop. And the other one we've already mentioned for me, which was when Christ's face was revealed, and it's about exactly halfway through the film, so it's a real like turning point in the project, which it kind of brought tears to my eyes, and changed my whole feelings about fused glass. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who watched this film and experienced this project in that way. So do you guys have a memorable moment that's captured in the documentary, and do you relive it at all?
Hmm.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the memorable moment for me, the one that sort of sticks out the most, is probably the first moment that Narcissus kind of softened for me. Like when I realized that he was going to be really helpful and not just be a teacher and not just speak down to me, but when he was going to be a major impact on my life. And it was probably that discussion we had at the kiln, when I said, this is not a referendum on my life or my value in this world. And he said, yes, it is. And I don't say that because I think he's entirely true on that, but I think that's what I needed to hear in that moment. And that to me, after that day, and he just, I was now comfortable knowing that I was with the right guy and that he was going to help me get through it. And so I think that was probably the biggest moment for me. The artwork part of it is always hard because as an artist, you're always critical. And, like I said in the end of the movie, I'm really relieved that it turned out good. I'm really glad we got it done. I felt a big weight off me. And so that was another moment, but it was like, that was more of like relief, I mean, did you guys watch the Masters? Who watched it? You didn't see Rory McIlroy, right? Like when he sank the putt and he collapsed. Like that was I remember him saying just the relief of all this pressure that I felt. I remember that I was like, that's exactly how I felt when that last panel went in. I'm like, I'm relieved. So those were probably the two moments. The final moment where I'm just in total relief, and then that early moment where Narcissus kind of says, I got your back. We're gonna get through this.
David?
Yeah, I don't know. You mean in terms of the movie? Um, I think the best quote of the movie is, Quentin saying that the last time he was in the suit that he was in was in front of a judge. And I think I think for me captures like all the lives that were affected by this project, and not only within our studio, but to see the reaction to the people in the church was it was a great feeling, and that all of these thinking about this piece being in that space, and the number of people that would see it, and kind of be a part of their spiritual journey or whatever it was. It definitely felt like a community. And this piece was going to be forever a part of their community, and they were all very proud of it. They all, as you mentioned, contributed towards it, and were a part of it. And so I think that's oftentimes when you're, and I know this for Tim in this project, is that, and us in the studio, you're in the trenches day in and day out. You forget sometimes why you're doing it or what you're doing, and the impact that it has on people. And so when you have those moments, when you see that, that's, I think, where you realize that we do this for the love of doing it.
Absolutely. So we're coming near the end. I've just got a couple more questions, if that's okay. And the first one is, have you both separately or together revisited the church? What do you think of the window? Have they ditched those massive speakers?
Yeah, Dave's probably been there more than I have, but I've only been there once since the window was installed, and it was just this last December. So more than 7 years since we installed it. And I'll tell you, it was really kind of amazing. And the speakers were still there now. Well, we'll get back to that in a second. But what amazed me when I showed up after not seeing it for 7 years was just how big it looked when I walked in. Because I think when you work on something in such a close proximity to it, the scale becomes normal and you start to kind of get used to it. And so by the time we finished it, it didn't feel that big to me. But coming in after 7 years of going back to my life, I walked in and I was like, I felt like the thing was going to fall down on me. It was so big. And I was so like happy, because I remember thinking, God, I have such a fresh eye. This is so working. It's like, whereas early on I was so, sometimes you have to turn your paintings against the wall for a while before you get perspective on them. So I was like, wow, this really is huge. Look at the size of this thing. And of course, this was still with the speakers there. So yeah, the speakers are now gone. They're not gone. There's a new set of speakers. David could probably describe that more because he's seen it. But yeah, it's really a cool thing to see, to go back to.
Yeah, I was there in December. I saw it without the speakers, and it's night and day. It's just like, it feels, it was very liberating feeling, because it was such a battle, that we knew we weren't, in a way, we weren't going to win. And so to see it actually corrected is, I think we'd kind of lost hope, but we kind of felt like maybe we would never see that. But it is spectacular to see it without the speakers. And yeah, it's a strange feeling. I mean, it feels a little bit like ancient history now to me, in a certain sense of that. I mean, I feel like we've got a lot more gray hairs and we've moved on, and there's a lot of different things that have happened since then. And so it is a interesting thing to see, because it's absolutely a pivotal piece for us. But it also feels like, wow, that feels like a long time ago sometimes to me.
Great. And we've touched on how this commission has shaped. There's the moment that Christ is revealed in the documentary. We've touched a little bit on the impact of this project on the studios. Here I think is a photograph from your Judson Studios website of some of your ancestors, David, from the early studio days. The commission was clearly a historic moment for Judson Studios, and I think it has shaped the work the studio is doing since. Now you've got the second studio. Do you want to tell us a bit more about what you're currently up to at Judson Studios?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a historic photo for me. That's my great grandfather there in the middle, and his two brothers were the kind of early founders of the company, and the whole process was constantly thinking about this generational kind of thing of what would I spent a lot of time, and it's ended up a book came out of it, of kind of researching the history of the studio and how decisions were made and how forefathers were made in a studio environment, and how these kind of decisions kind of impacted the studio. And obviously they'd done something right because it was still around, right? And so um, now I think we go about things a little bit differently in the sense of like trying to kind of. I mean, I think the message that I got, or kind of the kind of lesson I learned was that the studio evolved with the city of Los Angeles and with the tastes of the market of the period, right? And I think that's the beauty of art and stained glass, is that it evolves with time. And so, as much as stained glass is prides itself on its historic kind of traditions and fundamentals and craft, I think there's a lot to be said about what can we think about stained glass in the future, what can we contribute, and how can we think about stained glass a little bit differently without losing those principles, right? And I think that's what fused glass really resonated with me, is that I feel like it's still doing what stained glass does for us when we view it, right? In the sense of like stained glass is the only material, the only medium that can look the way it does and impact us the way it does. And so I think we've stayed true to that over time, and so I think that allows us a level of freedom that I feel like I didn't feel like we had before. And Narcissus and this project was a big part of that. And that Narcissus came in. And like I said, he was the maverick in the stained glass industry. We're one of the more traditional kind of studios in the industry, and so to have these two worlds collide really was a liberating experience, without feeling like we were diminishing kind of the storied past that this company has. And so yeah, and so I think, like I said, now with the fused glass projects that we're taking on, they're really pressing, I think, the envelope, pushing the envelope in terms of technology and working with architects and engineers and thinking about glass installations that are, in and of themselves stained glass, right? And not just an add-on to an architectural element, but something that I think stained glass can carry on its own. And it's something that Narcissus still works for us and is here, almost half the year. And we talk about this a lot. And it's something that we are consistently trying to think about and where we go from here. As I mentioned, like Chihuly, who comes out of the studio glass movement, the Bullseye people, and the creation of fused glass, in essence, in this period, is, I think, another chapter that is starting to unveil itself. And Tim and Narcissus are teaching a very large swath of people to really kind of take it out there. And that was fundamentally a decision we had to make, in that when we started down this road, we knew there would be a knowledge base that was being created, and how protective of that are you? And that was a big decision we had to make. And for me, it was, we want to be open, right? I had done research on Del de Verre and some other techniques that had happened in the past that basically died because they weren't disseminated. And that it needs to be part of the stained glass culture, and this knowledge needs to be shared for it to become something that we all kind of, as a community, develop and embrace and see it kind of become what I think it can become. And so I'm excited. I think it'll be really interesting to see where we are in 10 to 15 years.
Great. And Tim, I'm putting up your website here and there's a little picture of one of the portraits that you've made, I think, since setting up your own studio. Have you learned to trust your gut? That's a question that's related to the documentary.
Oh man, that's funny. That's the first line in the documentary. Um, I don't know. I don't know, Jasmine. Maybe. I definitely feel like I'm still a little more cerebral when it comes to my work and when it comes to the objectives of my work. Um, I think I trust my gut when it comes to certain things, like what to go after and what to say yes to and what to say no to. But I don't trust my gut when it comes to making predictions. That was the big thing about Justin's question. In your gut, is it going to turn out? I don't make those predictions. I know that I'm going to work really as hard as I can to do the best I can. So I still follow that. You know, when I left the studio and started my own place here, I was committed to continuing to do commission work, to teaching, and to experiment on my own with my work. And I've been doing that for 6 years. So that was a gut instinct that told me to do that. I do think, like David said, education is really important. So that's why we always, anytime, you know, I get a chance to talk about it, or I get invited anywhere to go and talk about it, or a new studio pops up, I'm game to do it, because I don't think that this, and when we talk about fused glass, it's going to be around forever. Fused glass has been around for 50 years. It's not going anywhere. But what we're doing specifically, pictorial fused glass, which is what I think is the specifics here, which is what leans it towards stained glass. I think these worlds need to continue to talk to each other. We're doing it. You know, it's just really, really early. We did a bullseye documentary. And Justin and I, you know, just sort of following up on my website, Justin and I have a new company called Vitrionics, which is I think Emily's going to drop a link in the chat to our class's website, and we're trying to teach and tell stories about what we're doing specifically with pictorial fused glass. And we have a little bullseye mini documentary on our YouTube channel, which talks about the history of fusing, and you know, and how young it is. It's just so young. I mean, think of the difference. Stained glass, 1,000 years old. Fused glass is 50 years old. But you have a long way to go to catch up. But it's important to continue to talk about it and to put it out there. So I think doing these projects like Judson is doing, putting giant glass murals on the sides of buildings, like that's really brand new. People do it in Germany with enameled glass, but not with fused glass. Bullseye's doing the same thing, and I'm trying to get into that kind of stuff. So it's just going to take a little bit of time, and so I just encourage people to follow the story, because it's unfolding like right before our eyes.
Great. Well, thank you, Tim and David, for joining us today and for talking so openly about this project, the riveting documentary and its making, but also about the future of fused glass in this world, and all that you're doing to encourage, teach and sustain that part of the stained glass world. We really appreciate it. I know that everyone joining, I think, has watched the movie already and no doubt wanted to find out more. I hope that we've answered all your questions today. Really grateful to Tim and David for joining us and giving us their time. This recording will be available after. Thank you all for joining us. Do make sure you get those follow-up links that are in the chat and on the slide here. And also, if you don't know much about the Stained Glass Museum, why not go to our website too and find out more about our collection. We're a small independent museum. Thank you for buying a ticket to this Q&A and supporting the museum in this way. But most of all, thank you to Tim and David for such brilliant conversation. I've really enjoyed speaking to you both this evening, and I hope all of you who've attended have also enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Good night for those joining in the UK, and sorry you have to get back to work for those of you in the States.